The thing I like about art, actually, is that it is a way to make sense of your life in the world. In reality, chance drives a lot of what happens to us. A lot of my projects are based on using sort of John Cage-style chance operations as a means to take yourself out of the equation, to, get away from your preconceptions and try to engage with the world the way the surrealists did, which is that if you can scratch through the surface of the everyday, there's some kind of strange, deeper magic underneath everything. So I've had a lot of projects. One, I'll mention a few that kind of feed into this or come, influence these newer projects here that are shown here. One is Chance Encounters, where I've spent years. I have a system where I can randomly select quarter-mile squares that are an overlay to all of urban Los Angeles County. I have a big map, it's like as tall as I am, like 12 feet wide, on gator board that I keep behind my studio door. And the rules are, whenever I have a whole day free, I can shake up these two containers that will randomly select a quarter-mile square out of 5,151 squares that cover all of urban Los Angeles County. It's a very strange thing to do, to be, then I drive there, kind of like take, wear nondescript clothes. It might be, rich neighborhood in Palos Verdes, or it might be, somewhere south of USC, where the police warned me, they roll up, two in a squad car, roll their window down and say, do you know where you are? That kind of neighborhood. So, yeah, really, I'm serious. But I'm kind of talking about another project. It's just that I really think that, in a way, I'm sort of trying to operate as kind of an anti-artist, in the sense that I see so many artists struggling to create work out of the limitations of their own head. When I look around and go, man, there's the whole world is out there, and it's rich and it's complicated and it's crazy. Why don't you just use your head to create a system to get at the world and create something, come away with an artifact of that? It's like much more interesting and certainly more complicated and true to life than something you struggle to manufacture out of your own small brain. Dream Street happened really by chance. I went to a fundraising auction for the Regional Food Bank. I started bidding on an auction prize, which was the right to name a street. At the end of the night, even though I had given up bidding on it, friends and my wife bid on it in my name, and the announcer said, Douglas McCulloh, the right to name a street. So I picked the name Dream Street after much agony and thought, and the day I found out where this street would be, I went there and started shooting photographs and talking to everyone about how a 40-acre strawberry field goes from agriculture, open land, to 134 houses. I like Dream Street for multiple reasons. It obviously is kind of strange and evocative, but it's also that dreams are beyond your control. You think of dreams, and there is, achieve your dreams, reach for your dream, the American dream. Those are dreams, but dreams are not, a nightmare is a dream as well. And you can't control them. And the surrealists, who, use chance a lot in to circumvent their own control, obviously use dreams, and obsessions in dreams and stuff as one of their methodologies as well. So a dream can be anything. So I thought, Dream Street, that's perfect. Goes into the hopper at county planning, months and months and months and months go by. Eventually I had a show in New Orleans. I get an email with an attachment. Here's where your street's gonna be. And it's kind of south of the 10 freeway, underneath the flight path of Ontario Airport, sort of, for people who, and it was, well, the afternoon I got back from New Orleans, I went there with a camera, and it was a 40-acre field still, and they were still permitting it, actually. So it was an open field. It had been a strawberry field in the spring, corn, pick your own, fruit stand like under eucalyptus trees on the corner. It was like, for as long as anyone could remember, decades and decades, farmed by Japanese farmers who had been interned at Manzanar in World War II. I mean, like I'm like, wow, this is where the street's gonna be? It's like, it's automatically, instantly layered with like classic California history, and they're planning to turn it into 134 houses. So the first day I was there, if you've looked at the photos, the guy Eric, which is the very first photo, I was there about an hour, and a guy came up this kind of street that runs parallel to it, and he's walking a little unsteadily, and it turned out to be Eric, who a few days before had gotten in a fight on the street. Two guys had beaten him up over a dispute over kind of flowers that he was selling, a bucket of street corner flowers, and they beat him to the ground, took a stick, and put out his right eye. And he's peeling back the bandage in the photo, and there's a whole sequence of them to show me where they had stitched his eye closed with these little stitches that look like spider legs, little black stitches. I'm like, okay, Dream Street. This is my first day at Dream Street. It's like, holy moly, maybe, I don't know. Check, yeah. It's kind of astonishing. Nightmare Street. I had multiple people tell me, you should have called it Nightmare Street, very early on. But, it's everything. It is people reaching for the dreams. So I don't want to give really a synopsis of what this is about here, because you can kind of, experience it yourself. I wanted to sort of point out a few maybe highlights to me. My experience of it was to go there day after day after day after day. And, I always tell people, and I told people there, I remember being on a roof, and they're like throwing roof tiles. This is a crew that gets money for loading roof tiles. And it's in the hot sun, and they asked me what my job was, the crew chief. Everybody else spoke Spanish, only, even though I grew up in Southern California, I studied German, so it's like the stupidest move ever. So I can only really talk to the crew chief. He asked me what my job is, and I say, well, and this was my description of my job, that's actually pretty much it right there, And they're, hang around for hours and like, there you go, that's the whole job. It's kind of horrible. I was embarrassed to admit it. But in hanging around, as Ingram said, it's always surprising to me how open people are. And I'm not really sure it's my some weird empathy or magic. I think it's that people want to be memorialized. And that if they were like amazed anyone's there to listen. They're like, what? This is a tract, this is production housing. What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm trying to tell the story of how this happens. And they, at that point, are like, really? Everybody talked to me. I got invited to the developers, conferences, everything. I never had anybody say no. And my mode of operation tends to be, if you're given an inch, take a yard. If you're given a yard, have a swimming pool installed in it, That's an old Mad Magazine joke. No, always push as far as you can push. So at that point, it's like, okay, they'll let me go on the second floor in the framed house, I'll go. They'll let me climb out on the roof before it's done, when they're just sheeting it, I'm there. So I just kind of hang around. I have become the guy who named the street. I still go to Dream Street now, even though all the houses are built. Actually, there's 4 lots that are still unbuilt, but because they built everything in phases. So now it's like, hey, come to our barbecue and whatever. I'm the guy who named the street. So I thought I would give introduce you to just a few people the reason I kind of chose this corner is it's got a few crazy, interesting stories. Does that seem useful? Useful, okay. I don't know what's useful about art. The great thing about art is its lack of utility, really. No, but really, it's kind of fantastic how it works. So I'm kind of like a weird reporter of this process. This guy here in the hat is Brad, and he actually has a set of plans. So he's called the markup guy. What he does is he runs around on these poured pads with a piece of chalk like the size of a banana, and a roll of plans. And he draws on the plans around the edge kind of I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It's like weird numerical notations and a slash and then some other numbers underneath it. What it does is it indicates to the framers how high the walls are and where the openings are. So that if there's a window, they don't need a set of plans. They never see a set of plans. His comment is they wouldn't know how to read the plans anyway, right? They just frame. And so then what happens is another guy, a friend of his, Donnie the Sawman, comes and a load of lumber that's already divided per house, so it's a certain amount of lumber per house gets dropped off beside each house. Donnie the Sawman, who's getting paid per house, shows up dragging his own saw. Everybody brings their own equipment. And he saws up that stack of lumber into pre-cut lengths. So he has like a checklist. All right, they need X number of 2x4s at 8 feet, X number of pieces. And so when the framers show up, well, I'll jump ahead. This is the guy here who amazingly, I love the tangle of stuff, you know? And so in the middle of it, fantastically, is a guy wearing a checked shirt, which you gotta love that, you know? It is, my rule of photography is that if you hang around long enough, just amazing stuff happens. It's like the guy in the middle of the check pattern wearing a checked shirt. That's Nick, he's the framing pimp. So what the framing pimp does, and he drives, this is a world of old beat up Toyotas, right? He drives a white, new Toyota sedan that's clean, right? So automatically you know, who is that guy, right? He's the framing pimp. So what happens is the framing company that is a sub to Young Homes, the developer, they need framers. They don't have any framers. Even the framing company has no framers, right? They have a couple guys whose job it is to, as they describe it, fix up the stuff that the framers irretrievably, right? So they have a couple guys who run around and try and prevent the framers from doing just egregiously horrible things. So they phone, anyhow, the framers, I'm getting ahead of the story. This is becoming incoherent. The framing company phones Nick the framing pimp and says, we have X number of houses to frame. Give me some framing crews. The framing crews are like freelance crews, and they get paid per house. So there's 6 to 8 guys, it's up to them, got to bring your own nail guns, and they show up and say, all right, we're going to try and frame 2 or 3 houses today. The wood's there, the notations are on the pad, and so they just fly. They don't mostly have to cut anything. They don't have to refer to anything. They just the nail guns are like, bam, 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 bam. And they're getting, depending on the house, $300 to frame a whole house. $350, maybe a bit more for a 2-story house. So they have to do 2 or 3 houses a day to make any money because they're dividing it. That's not per person, that's per crew. It's actually amazing to me. So jumping ahead a little bit, I was there when one of these guys was putting a little block in like this with the nail gun, and they're shooting 3.5-inch framing nails, and it split the wood, went through it's gone through his hand right here. Because the first thing they do, if you open a new box for nail guns, is you take off all the safety gear. It slows you down too much. So they fire the first time I saw one of these big nail guns, I was like, how's that work? And he goes, I'll show you, boom, and he just disappears out into the field, and then he goes boom and into a beam. So it's like boom. It's like, actually the only reason it didn't go through is that it had already gone through a 2x4 and split it and then into his hand. So he kind of walked around in circles for a while, and I'm shooting photos, which is really horrible. I felt like, what can you say? Is he did eventually pull that nail out. He didn't clip it off. He just and threw it out where the porch would be in the dust. And he kept framing. He's like, it never hit any bone. I think I'll just keep going. I'm like, wow, these guys are tough. The result of the kind of level of speed is is shown here, where this is Brent and David. He's one of the pieceworker framers. This guy has actually worked directly for the framing company. They were called Out West Framing. They've discovered that the trusses made by someone else in the high desert and trucked down are 3 feet short of hitting the bearing wall in the master bedroom. So problems ensue, basically. So they're standing up there going, what the hell's going on? Right? And David has a long quote here where he talks about how the peace workers just fly. And the end of it has something where he says, you know, a guy's nailing a 2x6 on, or supposed to nail a 2x6 on, he doesn't have, you know, or a 2x8 on, he doesn't have one. He sees a 2x6, so he just nails that on, you know. And he says, there's a lot of people with the case of out here. Everybody has a case of. So it's a very profane story, but it's quotations, so I kind of. I love this photo because people are hanging in all the way around. And since it's a school, I'm going to actually read one of these. I normally don't. John, one of the subs, said, they're talking about how hard all this work is. And John, it's a pretty brutal world out there, pretty tough. Ultimately, you have no one to blame but yourself. You got a job shoveling in the hot sun, $5 an hour with no medical or anything? Well, maybe you should have stayed in school. You're stacking roof tile every day for no money? You know that homework you didn't do? Well, maybe you should have done it. Maybe oversimplifies things somewhat, but I thought it's funny. Mind you, yeah, right. I don't know. The piecework really is throughout the entire system. This is Justin. He was installing windows. And he wouldn't tell me exactly how much he got per window, but he hinted that it was $1 a window. He knew that his boss got $5 a window. He was angling for 50 cents more, maybe a window. And the job of putting in the windows is not just to put in the windows, they drop off all the windows at one house way down at the end of the street, right? And then your job is to spread them out and then put them in for $1 a window. So they're literally like he's running through the houses. I've given books to everybody on Dream Street, and some people who are really in the book a lot and quoted a lot and stuff, yeah, I have it. And I was kind of nervous because people kept saying, what are you doing out here? You know, and the first thing, I named the street, but that didn't go that far. Yeah, but you're here all the time, you know? So then I had to say, well, I'm trying to, which it had become, I'm trying to tell the story of how these houses are made. And I kind of left it open a little bit so that if people wanted to think that, oh, first you pour the concrete, then you set the whatever. But this is more like the sociology of how it happens. Who gets paid what, who does what is more interesting. So I was the upshot is I wasn't that I was not truthful about what I was doing. I was very straightforward, but I was kind of worried because it's a really weird story. It's kind of harsh and strange, but everybody's been, wow, that's the only truthful account I've ever seen of this. As a sheer observer of it, I try to keep it neutral in a weird sort of way and just say, this is what is here. And maybe not spin it. Let people talk for themselves, you know? And if people want to draw conclusions, they can draw their own conclusions. Things are more powerful that way. There is, and we turned off the audio sound stuff, but there's an audio piece that I did with this fellow Stephen Cuevas, who's a reporter for KPCC in Pasadena, NPR station, and he's really a sound guru he did some NPR pieces on Dream Street in like July or something. And I have all this audio from out there, and it's, full of saws, and pounding, and then people trying to explain things, and me talking, and he was like, man, we should really work on an audio piece. So when Ingram called, he said, whoa, how about Dream Street? I said, man, we just started. I had actually gotten together with Cuevas one time to hear an early version of this kind of wacky montage. So the upshot is there's an audio piece, which we'll turn back up, and a video piece. My thinking on a lot of these things, and it's really only my idiosyncratic take on things, is that to try and have layers that inform each other but are not repetitive. So for example, if you can tell what's going on in the photo, I don't put it in the caption. I hate it when, it's a a battleship being launched down a ramp, and the caption says, battleship being launched down a ramp. You know, it's like, give me something else, you know? And actually, the thing I hate more is no caption, because, you know, with the high modernist take on photography for so long, it was some fantastic photo of something, and if you could find a caption, it might be way over there. It'll say, Mobile, Alabama, 1936. And I'm like, you know, what is that? So I always like text. I'm sorry, I'm swearing a lot. I'm influenced by construction workers. And my wife, who I tell people grew up on the docks in Vancouver. But anyhow, so what I've tried to do with the video piece and the audio is have them be kind of additional pieces that float with or inhabit the same space. So it's through a neighborhood at dusk with a girl riding a bicycle at you, and it loops totally, so it comes back around through this labyrinth of streets and to the same spot and just continues, so it just goes and goes. That seemed like kind of a strangely melancholy but peaceful. I didn't want more bleakness. I like to think that photographers get good at facing what's real, even if it's reality about humanity, you know. But you gotta do something, you know, even if it is sad and futile. Feudal memorials started when I was invited to be in an anti-war show. And I thought, okay, I will actually look at what the record of humanity in relation to war is. And I compiled, as a result, a list of every single war that I could find and its dates, and assembled it into a huge scroll chronology. I've had extreme, almost unprecedented access to the closed air base at El Toro, the Marine Corps Air Base at El Toro. And the feudal memorials combines a photograph with a text. The text describes a specific incident from a war, and the photograph is my tiny feudal commemorative gesture in response to that. So there's a specific incident from a war, and then I do the tiniest gesture, light a match, throw a white rock, pour a liter of water, and capture that in a photograph. Art is a good thing to do in the world because it's essentially, I think the world is essentially kind of senseless in a way, except for maybe our human relationships. And art is ultimately completely senseless. It has no real use, except that it's central to being human. Usefulness of art, or the utility of art, is a strange question. I profess to say that it's essentially useless, that it is made for, you know, you can't eat it, you can't sit on it, you can't drive it, you can't live in it. But at the same time, these two shows here, the Dream Street story and these memorials done at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, essentially have a lot of content. And in a way, there's a fabulous Kafka quote where he said, art is like an axe that is intended to break up the frozen sea inside of us, so that then it kind of shatters that frozen sea and forces you to engage with something in the world. In this case, houses, construction, how they're made, or humanity's relationship with violence and war. Hard things to look at, so maybe art can make you look.